Oh, I got it. Yeah. So, Bill Carter, I'm the CTO for the foundation, and thanks for being here. I thought I would try to spend a few minutes with this group and kind of give you an update on what's happening and where we're at. So, as many of you know, there's actually a track going on in parallel with this called OpenBMC, and I think that the fact that there's a different track going on, it would raise a question about why do you have a hardware management track and then there's an OpenBMC track. So I wanted to take this opportunity to explain the relationship of those two to the foundation as well as to this group, and really I wanted to point out the importance of this group, so that's my goal. So first off, if you kind of go back and look at what happened in the last 3 years, an opportunity to open source the BMC, the management firmware, really started with Facebook, and about 3 years ago, and the Facebook team actually had a couple of interns on it, and they were able to create a BMC firmware stack and ran it on a network switch. Of course, the interns went back to college and left Facebook with a code stack that they had to go figure out how to use after that. At the same time, in parallel, Rackspace was working on a new Power8 platform, and they were interested in creating a completely open-sourced hardware and firmware solution. And so, working with the IBM Open Power group, Rackspace and IBM created a separate repo and stack for BMC, and they actually later on when the Power8 was launched and Barrel-I was launched, that product was open sourced, and so that was probably 2.5 years ago. So the IBM Open Power team had continued to make improvements to that repo, and it kind of took on a life of its own. And this last year, working with Facebook and Microsoft and Intel and Google, Mellanox, and obviously IBM, they've made quite a bit of progress on that. And very recently, they decided, IBM, the owner of that repo, or the keeper of that repo, decided that they wanted to assign that repo to the Linux Foundation. And so they've been able to form a technical steering committee made up of the companies I mentioned, and they've created a governance policy, and the contributors have signed their contributor license agreement. So it's it's a formal project, right? It's exactly where you'd want a project like this to be. But it also means that it's no longer under our care and feeding as an organization. It's under the Linux Foundation. And that's not something that we have a choice in as a foundation. Everything that you guys do is you get to decide what you want to contribute to our foundation, and in this case it was contributed to a different organization. And so we still strongly support the activity that's going on there, and we're very reliant on that as an option for providing hardware management firmware. And as a result of that, we're obviously, we've given it plenty of airtime this week, and there's a complete track going on in parallel where all those companies I mentioned are talking about, what they're doing specifically, the roadmap for the code, and so on. So that's going on next door. But today, it probably represents the end of that support. In the future, I would expect to see the Linux Foundation organize these OpenBMC meetings. For us as a foundation, looking ahead, embedded firmware is really important to us, and so we will continue to work with organizations that are becoming available, and projects that are spawning that has embedded firmware that touches cloud hardware, and so we'll certainly embrace that and look for opportunities to be involved. I think of OpenBMC as a tool. You have a skill saw, various saws and lumber, but really you really care about the end product, the chair. And in our case, you want to have a couple of different variants of the chair, different colors of the chair, but still built from the same tool set. And so, much like a woodworking project, OpenBMC, and really hardware management is simply a tool. And so today in existence we have a lot of different tools. These are just 3 examples of tools that we have available. The Facebook group still maintains their own repo for hardware management. Obviously there's a repo that's maintained in public with the OpenBMC group. Then there's other repos out there. So if your company has been working on OpenBMC, you probably have your own repo, behind your firewall, and it may or may not, be contributed back into the code stack. In fact, it's probably likely that it's quite different. And so if you could kind of count all of them out there, I'd venture to say there's probably 15 or 20 different variants of embedded BMC firmware software, and besides these 3, and so anyway, there's lots of options. And by the way, it's not just in terms of software, in terms of having hardware management tools. We talk about open source tools, but our goal is to have a managed platform that regardless of where you buy your platform or who provides it, that the management, the northbound API, basically behaves the same. And so any type of software that you run to manage, orchestration software that you run to manage that is going to be managed the same. So regardless of how you create that hardware management API down in the hardware, we do want it to behave the same. So to that degree, we're kind of, at least I view this group as being somewhat agnostic about how you achieve that. It can be achieved through open sourcing. It could be achieved through your own private repos that may be a derivative of open source. It could be achieved through something that's completely proprietary. It's really up to you and the path that you take. And I have to thank these 2 gentlemen over here, Jeff and John, for educating me on the relationship between the tool and and what we're trying to achieve. So what does that mean? So as an organization, what we're interested in is having products that behave the same, and we're really focused on the product and how you. Obviously, we open source hardware. Continue to do that, promote that, set that expectation. We'd love to see all the embedded firmware also open sourced. It makes it much easier to adopt it, to make changes to it, to innovate on top of that. That's important. It's important to keep that innovation wheel moving, and having access to all of the bits is really important. And we'll continue to encourage that. But it doesn't mean that you can't participate with your own proprietary firmware. The whole idea is that at the end of the day, that we have hardware that behaves the same. So so today in our marketplace we have over 100 products. Those are products that actually have the OCP recognition mark, a trademark, licensed in I don't know, it was last count it was like 50 different countries, but anyway, we have a trademark that indicates that this is an open product, that it meets the tenets of openness, and that it that the hardware design has been open sourced, and the specifications are. That's the OCP accepted and OCP inspired logo. So what we really envision is that as this group continues to work on open standards and open standards for management, that we can then apply these trademarks to these products in the future. And the goal would be, the vision that I have is that someday that we have a product marketplace like we have today with, we have 100 products in the marketplace. I think we have a goal of hitting 150 this time next year, that we have 150 products on it. And And regardless of whether it's a compute storage device, a rack controller, or a network appliance, and regardless of where it comes from, that basically from an API level, or from the kind of looking northbound from that device, that it's managed the same and it behaves the same. And so to that end, this group has been working on establishing OCP profiles, and they're going to spend the rest of the morning talking in depth about that. But that's our goal, is that if you have a compute device, that it has that regardless of where it came from, whether it's a Quanta or WeWin or Inspur or HP or Ericsson device or Nokia device, that it really is, it looks the same from a management perspective. And the vision here is that we want to be able to take advantage of the relationships that we're forming today with organizations like OPNFV for telecom, or the Linux Foundation for cloud, or working with Microsoft and the Azure team. We want to make sure that we can go to these organizations, these groups, the companies that are delivering orchestration software, and have a story that says, I have a portfolio of products that it's multi-sourced, and it's interchangeable, and it's interoperable. And regardless of the product, you can manage the product the same way, that it has an expected behavior, and it has an expected response. And if we can achieve that in the future, imagine what that orchestration software would be capable of doing. Today, orchestration software gets really basic information from the hardware. Yeah, it can maybe do a power cycle or a reset. Sometimes sometimes it can reflash the BIOS, but usually it can't even do that. There's some vendor-specific utility that you have to use to reflash. But little things like that, we have an opportunity to present a kind of a unified API that allows us to achieve those things. There's roughly 120, I think it's 120 properties in the Redfish profile. Imagine if we could present some subset of those properties to the orchestration software. And again, there's a lot of different choices out there for orchestration software, both open sourced versions like ONAP, but also proprietary vendor-specific options. Imagine if we could present hardware that behaved exactly the same. I think at that point, the companies that are in open source groups like ONAP would be able to say, gosh, there's a whole set of features now that I can make available, because the common denominator is, I've raised that common denominator in terms of hardware. So again, what I envision is that we work together to define those profiles, to kind of set that standard, and as a foundation, we will then turn around and work with those other organizations and encourage them to kind of design to a new level, and consistent across compute, storage, networking, and even other devices, power devices, and so on. Basically everything that's managed, right? And that I also envision that our branding program someday will include assigning a trademark or a brand or some type of recognition. By the way, I'm just throwing this out because we don't know what that would be. I think we would look to this group to tell us what you'd like to have, but I envision that we're going to get to the point where Bernie and the other project leads are going to come back, and John and Jeff and others are going to say, I think we're at the point where we're ready to go establish a trademark, some type of certification mark, something to signify to the world that this platform, whether it's a computer or switch or an embedded controller in a PowerShell, meets this standard for interoperability at the software level, at the manageability level. And we're going to be able to put a mark on that device, and then from then on, everybody knows that that's a managed device and they know how it behaves. So, I'd like to see that happen tomorrow. I don't know when that's going to happen. I think that we can, as a foundation, I'm feeling pretty confident that we can move pretty quickly in terms of delivering that support. It's really up to everybody in this room to get together and work on establishing those specs, agreeing on what goes into that, and kind of brainstorming on how you would like open hardware to be presented to the rest of the world. And is there a trademark? Is there a certification mark? Is there interoperability that needs to go on? You guys are the smart guys. You can figure that out. Just tell us what to do, and we'll help you. So anyway, the goal would be that we have some badge of honor that goes on that hardware. Oh, I haven't had that slide. And so again, down the road, I actually envision that at some point, on our marketplace, OCP Accepted takes on a whole new meaning, and we kind of continually raise the bar, and that we may get to the point where we say, I think we have this hardware management in place, regardless of the tool that you use to develop it, and we're going to kind of raise the bar and say that at some future point, everything that carries that brand should be managed the same way.
Does it mean that when it's accepted, you have to pass certain criteria?
So today, with our branding program, we have the suppliers, basically they have to acknowledge that the product that they are selling conforms to and meets the specification that's already been contributed and accepted by the foundation. So I'll use the Facebook Tiano 2-socket Xeon motherboard. They have a very comprehensive specification that was written last year, and it gets updated once in a while, but mostly just typo changes, very minor changes. So that specification was formally contributed to OCP and to the open source community, and others are building products that comply with that. Okay, and so what we ask is that when they submit a product, that they acknowledge that it meets that specification 100%. Okay, and we don't do self-test today. I'm sorry, we don't verify that, but we do ask that they, agree in writing that it does that, and that's part of the kind of the legal requirement of getting that certification, is they agree that it meets that. By the way, we also ask that they make sure that product is available to anyone that wants to buy it. Okay, so they don't get a choice on who they sell it to. It has to be available to everybody. Right? That's part of this whole open community movement. And there's a couple other things we do. We make sure that there's some proper licensing in place and some trademark usage and other things, some paperwork stuff. Basically what that means. The OCP Accepted logo actually has one additional requirement, and that is that all of the design collateral is also available. Schematics, bill of materials, your Cadence BRD file, timing diagrams, those things. And so again, if your product carries that logo, it also carries, or that information is available. And the whole idea is that now, as a consumer, they can very easily identify, truly open-sourced products with those two logos. Good question. Yeah. So this is a map that Arpit showed yesterday in the keynote, and I kind of like that. And and the message there is that there's a lot of different open source projects underway, and we'd like to make sure that those are built upon our open source hardware. And we have we're focused on the cloud. There's another organization called the Telecom Infra Project that's focused on basically on the edge for telecom and radio network. And we just want to make sure that we give them that option and to build on that, encourage that, and that's part of the relationship that was announced yesterday. To formalize that relationship and allow us to do co-marketing, but more importantly, today that relationship is really at in-band software level. And so they really know nothing about the underlying hardware. And this group has the opportunity to define profiles that allows those orchestrators to now go back and touch the hardware through hardware management and do so in a standard fashion. And so again, what we're, my vision, and I think the vision shared by all of us here, is that we provide that common API to allow that out-of-band communication. And that gives us the opportunity to then work with organizations like CORE, like OPNFV, like ONAP, and others, and certainly the OpenStack ingredients and so on. Open Daylight, for example, is really add more features, deliver more functionality into the community. And finally, like I started off by saying, is that as a foundation, we're pretty small. There's 8 of us. And actually, some of us are part-time, so there's not even 8 of us. And we run this, try to anyway, at least try to get out of your way. And so everything that happens in OCP happens from you and from the community. And we have community leaders that are actively asking for your help, and I would encourage you to reach out and work with them, get involved in the monthly phone calls. Really, if you have ideas, bring them to the table and engage with them. Bernie runs the projects. We have our incubation committee member, John Leong from Intel, with us today, and reach out to them. So again, thank you. Any questions? I got a few more minutes. Yeah. How'd I do, John? Did I? Okay. Kind of trying to play back what you guys have been teaching me, but I did okay. I did okay. Good. Well, it's really important to kind of understand the relationship about the tool and the and the product, and we're focused on the product. And by the way, we're also focused on the tool, and so this afternoon, part of the reason for having this track run in parallel with OpenBMC, it wasn't by chance, it was by design. We actually have 2 new projects that we're launching. We have the Open System Firmware project that was launched. That project is really looking at open sourcing, I'll say, most of the components of BIOS, or what some people call BIOS. I say most of the components because there is chipset and memory initialization that probably will never be open sourced. It's considerable IP within that binary, but at least we want to make sure that we have a framework that allows those binaries to be consumed and relocated within the code, and that we can build a firmware image regardless of the underlying processor that you're using. We're also looking at being able to take advantage of a Linux boot to replace some of the Dixie drivers as a substitute for UEFI, and looking at UEFI as an opportunities there to take the EDK2 and get more eyes on it, more development on it, look at opportunities to streamline that and open source that software stack. I'm going to put Rajiv on point. I'd like to introduce our latest employee in the foundation. It's Rajiv Sharma. He's our Director of Software and Technologies. Rajiv was hired a few weeks ago, and for a couple of things. One is that embedded firmware is really important to the foundation, and so Rajiv is going to help these groups get some traction. And so this is really important to us, and we're putting resources in place to move ahead.
So I have the mic for questions. Nothing. Crystal clear. Good.
Wow. It was either good or I didn't.
Great.
Or lucky.
All right.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Let's give Bill a hand.